You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hey, all you music lovers out there, welcome to Modern Musicology. My name is Alan, and in the studio this week is Stephanie Seymour.
Hello, everyone.
And Rob Levy.
Hey, everybody.
And how's both y'all doing this week?
Oh, peachy.
Good.
Yay, I'm glad to hear it. We have a very special show this week. We're going to be talking with Brad Tolinski, who is one of the co-authors of the new book, Blow by Blow, the Jeff Beck Story. So before we get into our interview tonight, we do have a little bit of business to take care of, and that is just within the last few days, we learned that Glen Hansard passed away. And I know that, Stephanie, you have a little bit of a connection to him. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I just have a lot of friends and a very good friend who was really pretty much best friends with Glen. And it's just, you know, a bunch of people that are friends with him or that were friends with him and have either maybe played with him, hosted a show where he played at, and also, you know, just were maybe friends and fans, you know, of him. So it's literally like it's like a shot in the gut. I mean, it's so tragic how he lost his life and just at such a young age, and the height of his, you know, I think he was just at such a creative, he's always been such a creative guy, but my God, he's just like, it never stops with him, and it's just so tragic.
Yeah, I think most people are familiar with him from the Swell season.
Yeah.
But also probably most popular for the production Once, which was a stage drama and then became a movie and won an Oscar for Best Original Song for Falling Slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I saw him with Swell season. I saw Swell season
really?
At the Radio City, I believe, which was one of the great shows, really. It was amazing.
Yeah, wow. They played here, and we had him at KDHX in 2012.
Cool.
He came in and did a session, and a bunch of the DJs came down and sort of watched it and hung out. And he could not have been more gracious. He could not have been more nice. You know, at this point, it's, you know, he's shooting like a rising rocket at this point, right? And just down to earth and personable and great. And when you listen to his records, they're incredibly, lyrically anyway, emotional and very embedded in stories and the narrative. And that is also him as a person. What Steph said, it's like to be, 56, 54? Yeah. It's just, it's absolutely horrible. And the shock of it, I think, is sort of what magnifies everything. But putting away the shock of it, you know, he was a really terrific musician, both on his own, and he had the gift of being able to play well with other musicians and get the best out of them when he played with them too. So, I mean, he had literally 3 careers. He had his solo career, he had the Swell season, he had his partner from Once, and then he's got his own solo career. I mean, most musicians don't get that. And to have that by the time you're 56 is mind-boggling.
Yeah. So Glen Hansard died on July 29th, so very recently, and really sad passing. And so our condolences go out to his family, friends, and fans. All right, so let's get into our interview. All right, so this week we are going to be joined by Brad Tolinski, who was a editor-in-chief at Guitar World magazine for, I think, like 25 years. And he is the co-author with his friend Chris Gill of a new book called Blow by Blow, the Jeff Beck Story. And Brad has also written some other books, including also with Chris, Eruption, Conversations with Eddie Van Halen, and as a co-author with other people, Light and Shade, Conversations with Jimmy Page, Play It Loud, An Epic History of the Sound, Style, and Revolution of Electric Guitar, and MC5, an oral biography of rock's most revolutionary band. And Brad has known Jeff Beck and has interviewed him many times over the years. And this new book, Blow by Blow, just came out on July 14th from Da Capo Books. Brad, thank you so much for joining us. This is such a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Seems like a real cool group here. So it's my pleasure.
We try.
We try. Yes, exactly.
I want to just start by asking you sort of an overall question, because I'm always curious about the creative process of such a massive undertaking, of something that like a giant 400-page book. So I know this started out from the fact that both you and Chris, work in the publishing industry. You both had interviewed Jeff numerous times, obviously. And so I'm assuming you compiled your interviews, your notes, but was that alone enough for a 400-page book, or did you have to interview a whole bunch more people to get more information? Like, how did that all come together?
Well, it's always tricky for me, that initial process, because you want to interview, you want to get other voices, you want to get interesting people, but you almost have to figure out what you want to say first. So for me, there's always a couple months of just really researching and thinking about my topic, so that when I get somebody interesting, that I ask the right questions, and something that furthers whatever way I'm thinking. But we talked to all sorts of interesting people. I mean, Jeff was a really good interview. He was a lot of fun. He had a super dry wit, but he was also somebody that withheld it a little bit, so you needed to get other voices. You need to get other people talking about what really happened. And Jeff also had the habit of not letting a good story get in the way of the truth. So there was a certain amount of figuring out among which of the three different ways he told the story, which one was really the
Wow.
We talked to, people from the Yardbirds. We spoke to Clive Davis, who was a really important part of the Jeff Beck story that most people aren't aware of. And there's even a big surprise in the book, and I'm sure we'll get to that, is there were these sessions that Jeff did in Motown that people don't really know much about. And I was actually able to track down an engineer that was on those sessions. So, stuff like that was essential to creating a great book.
Sure.
And you mentioned Clive Davis, who, as we're recording this, just passed away like maybe a month ago. When was it that you interviewed him for the book, and how long before he passed did that happen?
It wasn't that long ago. What's really, it's sort of a funny story that I'll share with you. At one point, I was sort of digging into, Jeff had signed this contract with Epic Records in the early 70s, but I couldn't really find out the real story behind it. I was just having a difficult time. And I'm like, well, the only person that's going to really know about this is going to be Clive Davis. Good luck getting to him,
Yeah.
And a friend of mine gave me an email to his gatekeeper. And wrote a nice personal note. Didn't hear anything for forever and ever. Wasn't sure whether I was going to hear anything forever and ever. And one morning, I'm not an early riser. I'm a rock and roller at heart. I'm still like sort of walking around groggy at 9 o'clock in the morning. And all of a sudden I see this phone number come on my phone, and it's like, this doesn't look recognizable to me. But I answered it anyways. And it was, hello, Brad, Clive Davis here.
Oh my God.
I'm like, bah!
Gotta wake you up.
Wow.
But Clive turned out to be great. I mean, it was a year before he passed away.
Okay.
But he seemed really excited to talk about Jeff. He really loved Jeff as an artist. And we might not even have been talking about Jeff right now if it hadn't been in some ways for Clive. When Jeff signed to Epic Records, the label was still relatively a small label, and they really wanted to get some tentpole artists. So they agreed somehow, Clive Davis agreed somehow to give Jeff a 10-record deal.
God.
Oh my
That's
God.
incredible.
Wow, that's unheard of today.
I know.
It's unheard of ever.
Yeah.
And, it was like it was a 10-album deal and no guardrails, sort of like there weren't like,
Wow.
You have to deliver these hits, or even that you have to deliver these records within X amount of time. And so this seemed extraordinary to me,
Yeah.
And so that's why I needed to get a hold of Clive for the book. Like, tell me about this, And Clive was, he was pretty succinct and put it like this: is he sort of saw Jeff as a singular talent. Like there was only, one person that could make this kind of sound on the guitar, and that there would always be fans of that. So in some ways I asked Clive, so you saw him almost more like a jazz musician. And he said, yeah, I mean, you're not going to tell Miles Davis or John Coltrane what to do and how to play their music. So, it was Clive's belief in Jeff that allowed Jeff to go in a million different kind of ways, and be the creative, adventurous artist that he was.
Wow.
And then this kind of leads into something I wanted to ask you, because you talk to so many people, like you said in the book. I'm just wondering, having talked to so many people that were around Beck and close to Beck, did you learn anything that really surprised you that you may not have known before?
Yeah. I mean, the book is sort of full of stuff like that, because the truth is, it's weird. Like Jeff, he was iconic and sort of this arena rock star, but yet he had this sort of low profile cool of like a underground cult artist in a way. And he in general kept sort of a low profile. And so, he wasn't written about in the same way that Eric Clapton or maybe a Jimmy Page or Jimi Hendrix had been written about. So in some ways I didn't know a lot about a lot. So these people were crucial for filling in these missing blanks. To get to your point, there were things like he split his head open on 3 different occasions. And it's sort of funny and weird, but at the same time, it's stuff like that impacts careers and trajectories in ways that, even creative ways that you would never expect. So you find out information like that, and then you're like, oh, okay, that's why he was having these headaches. That's why he was sort of disagreeable on the road. He was fragile in a certain kind of way. It led to that revelation sort of led to, many other avenues in the book.
Wasn't that the first time he did that? That Bob, my husband, was saying this. The first time he hit his head, he actually said he ended up feeling the music, like he ended up feeling more musical after that, like feeling the ability to play and all that. Is that, am I making that up, or did he say
I think the way that it's presented, or the way I understand it, is that it caused him to have difficulties concentrating on schoolwork and a bunch of other things. And the only thing that sort of made sense to him at that time was the guitar, and playing music. He was able to focus on it.
Right, like that could hold his attention. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is fascinating, So from start to finish, another sort of more broad question just about the book. I am curious, how long from the idea, the germination of the idea, to, the book coming out, how long of a process was that for you both? For you and
well, we joke that it was, it's a 20-year process, because we both started talking to Jeff sort of so long ago,
But you didn't have the idea for doing the book.
But we didn't have the idea of doing the book. What happened is Chris and I had written a book that you mentioned earlier, Eruption Conversations with Eddie Van Halen. And it was really, it was a very successful book, actually. So the publishers of, what do you've got next? So Chris and I sort of talked a little bit about it. And we talked about Jeff and the idea book, because we both had relationship with him and his story hadn't been told properly. Well, we felt that it hadn't been told properly anyways. And then he passed away unexpectedly in 2023. So we sort of felt almost an obligation to write this book, that his music wasn't forgotten. I mean, I consider for him to be one of the great musicians of the 20th and I guess the first part of the 21st century. And the fact that there hadn't been a real analysis of who he was and who he was as an artist and a player, it just felt like, the right thing for us to do.
And then do you think, you mentioned this a little bit, was that sort of enigmatic traits of his personality something he played up, or do you think that was just who he was, or how does that sort of fit into the puzzle? Because when you interview a person like him as a journalist, you get a totally different perception of who they are as people than the average person who just listens to the records. I'm just kind of curious how that all balanced out.
Well, I think Jeff and the book, at least I hope we explain it properly. He had this reputation of being sort of a surly, difficult character early on in his career. And he sort of mellowed out a bit later. I always found him to be an enormously sort of charming guy. In fact, so much so it would make me mad because I would interview him. And then I realized after I would transcribe the tape that he'd completely dodged certain questions by telling some stupid joke and getting us both off the topic, So he was very skilled at not talking about what he didn't want to talk about. But I think Chris and I both had a really interesting initial encounter with him. I was the first time I interviewed Jeff, I interviewed him with Jimmy Page. And I had sort of a long-term journalistic relationship with Page. So, I got the secret pat on the back, so Jeff was probably like, well, if Jimmy likes him, this guy's got to be sort of okay, that kind of thing. And Chris's story is even funnier, and we actually kick off the book with it. I'm not going to go into complete detail because it'll spoil how fun the anecdote is. But the way that Chris sort of got on Jeff's good side is almost more extraordinary than mine. So Jeff, his hero, his first guitar hero, was a rockabilly guitarist named Cliff Gallup. And Cliff played with Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps. Their big hit song was Bebop-A-Lula, for your audience. But Gallup, this guy that, Jeff worshipped so much that later on in his career, he did a whole album as a tribute to Cliff Gallup. He was a huge fan of this guy. And Gallup himself only played on a handful of tracks. His career might have been about 2 years long. He didn't like the spotlight, and he was an enigmatic figure himself. And Chris talked to Cliff's widow and managed to get his picks and I forget something else that was actually signed by Cliff, and gave it to Jeff. And Jeff literally could not believe it. It was, it's sort of hard to explain how significant that was, but maybe this is a way I can do it really quick. So while later on, towards the end of Jeff's career, he did this record called Crazy Legs, which was a rockabilly tribute essentially to Cliff Gallup, where he was trying his best to completely, note for note, nuance for nuance, replicate everything that Cliff ever did. And one of the puzzles was, what picks? How do I get that exact sound? Because there was no record of it or anything. And it's only the stuff of legend, So for Jeff to all of a sudden get the validation of what he actually used was
oh, that's so amazing. It was like getting gold.
So after that, I mean, forget it, he Chris was in.
So then you guys began your journey, I guess, writing or interviewing people, compiling how did you go about compiling your interviews together? Like, there must have been.
How did we work together?
Yeah. Like, how was your timeline, and how did that all work?
People are intrigued by that, and I sort of don't blame them. But so I was the editor, as you mentioned, the editor-in-chief of Guitar World for 20 some years. And Chris was one of my regular writers, and he was an editor on that magazine. And Guitar World, has had a real voice. I think we just got used to writing in that voice, so we blended. But also, Chris had interviewed Jeff about certain things in his career, and I had interviewed him about others. So it made it really sort of easy to split up, like who was going to do what,
Okay.
And then we were also each one of ours, worst critics, and I like to work with people. I just like it, like I don't find it a chore, I find it great. Like you have your knowledgeable friend to bounce off of, like, hey, what do you think about this or that? And Chris will joke about that. We fought like cats and dogs, but we had very few disagreements about things. I thought it was a very super productive relationship.
Well, let's get into some of Beck's career a little bit, because I want to kind of go back to the Yardbirds, which was like one of the foundational groups of the modern rock era, I think, and influenced so many artists and bands after them. And of course, started the career of not only Jeff Beck, but Clapton and Jimmy Page, and just that alone. But there's so much music that they produced. Some of the songs like For Your Love, Heart Full of Soul, Train Kept a Rollin', Shapes of Things, Still I'm Sad, Over, Under, Sideways, Down, all these songs that have been covered so many times by later groups and really influenced the style and some of even the career of later bands. Talk about the importance of the Yardbirds and sort of how that shaped Jeff's playing and his career.
Well, I've always been a huge fan of the Yardbird stuff. I wrote a book about the MC5. I'm a big fan of, garage rock and that kind of early, aggression. And actually, it's funny because the MC5 were huge Yardbirds fanatics. That was like one of the only bands that they really thought was any good, But the Yardbirds, what was interesting to me while I was writing the book is I thought I knew the Yardbird story. There were a lot of things that I was confused about and sort of surprised when I dug deeper into it. I had fantastic interviews with their original bass player and rhythm guitarist, Chris Drea, and the drummer, Jim McCarty. They were able to fill in some of the missing blanks. But what I was really surprised to find was how ahead of the curve the Yardbirds were, which may be the reason why they weren't really the Stones or the Beatles. Like, for instance, Jeff used fuzz on his guitar a year before Satisfaction came out by the Stones. And they were doing, sort of psychedelic music, Heart Full of Soul, songs like that 2 years before Purple Haze came around. And Jimi Hendrix said many, many times that Jeff was a huge influence on him. But then again, you even listen to Paul McCartney's solo on something like Taxman. To me, it's a total knockoff of Shapes of Things, And I I would even say this. I mean, it's a little bit of an obscure point, and I have to push it a little hard, but I sort of do believe it, that not only did they help create sort of garage rock, psychedelia, but I think that they were also the precursors to sort of goth music. Like they had these songs that, like Still I'm Sad, with these sort of moody, drony types of songs. And that was a year before, say, Eleanor Rigby. And that was a year before the Stones were doing things like Paint It Black. So, but as I'm fond of saying, as with Jeff, is that being ahead of your time isn't always necessarily rewarded in rock and roll.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Usually
interesting,
not.
though, because I think that Yardbirds were very influential on the later emerging heavy metal scene. I don't think I would have made that same connection to goth. That would never have occurred to me, but that's a really interesting point that you make.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because you can also make that correlation to sort of what we would think of now as Britpop, right? Like bands like the Charlatans and things. And also you can make that correlation to what we would call shoegaze now, because the fuzz guitar kind of started all that. So they were sort of like on the vanguard of like all of this. And they were kind of the time where all these people that made these records 20 or 30 years later were getting their dads and parents copies of Yardbirds records. So it does totally fit that they would influence like so many people.
I mean, there wasn't anybody really doing things like Still I'm Sad or even Evil Hearted You, which to me is like proto Doors music or something like that. Their singer, Keith Ralph, I can't really think of anybody that sang in sort of like that sort of sinister baritone kind of voice. Like they were quote unquote a blues band, but Keith Ralph didn't really sing like a blues singer, but he did sing, he did have sort of this ominous thing. And I think that, I mean, certainly their contemporaries like Herman's Hermits or whatever, was nowhere in that sort of league.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting to look at some of the ways that some of those songs were either covered or referenced, because like Blackmore's side group Rainbow on their first album did a cover of Still I'm Sad, which then kind of was transformed the way that they performed it live. And it's kind of very different from the original version. And I think it's really cool to see the way that song evolved. And, there's so many things like that get referenced in unexpected places. Like Heart did an arrangement of Magic Man one tour, as far as I know, where their lead guitarist Howard Lees I think it's Shapes of Things, put that little guitar lick in his guitar solo part, and it's so unexpected and it's so weird. And then Bowie just throws the line over, under, sideways, down into a song one time. And all these, even if it's not like a straight cover, it's these cool little musical references that all roads lead back to Yardbirds.
Yeah. Well, I think what's really interesting or fascinating is that, the Yardbirds, one of their big hits was Shapes of Things. Mm-hmm. But Jeff Beck himself covers Shapes of Things.
Yes.
2 years later, and turns it into what I call one of the first heavy metal songs of all time. He just takes that and, slows it down. And as he says in the book, I wanted to make something evil out of it,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, those songs, they were ahead of their time and they were cool,
Mm-hmm.
And it is sort of fun that I talk about, they make this trip, the Yardbirds make this trip to New York, and they actually fall in with Warhol's group of people, and Warhol was a huge Yardbirds fan. So do you really need to have anything more validate you're cool more than that? Not really.
Right.
One of the things you talk about early on in the book is how Jeff Beck really loved, so many people of his generation going to the cinema. Like so many musicians at this time are just going to the movies. And to me, when I listen to some of those first couple of records, they almost seem cinematic in how the guitar solos are really drawn out and sprawled. And it's almost like he's painting scenes, sort of in the same way that Miles Davis did, different in a way. But I'm wondering if like that had some sort of subconscious influence on him, sort of this idea of like having, at least in his mind, a visual sense of where the song was going and then having it manifest into like his fingers and then the guitar, or am I just nuts?
No, I mean, I think sort of the way to address that is taking like the long view of Jeff's career, which is a tangled and wild road, and part of the challenge of the book, really. We talk about his band that he played in before the Yardbirds, his band called the Tridents. And they were sort of a big deal blues rock band in England in like 64, 65, just right before the Yardbirds. I'm going to even pull back a little bit further. So the three guitar players that really influenced Jeff were Les Paul, who was a crazy, a wild man, inventor, of effects and sort of all sorts of adventurous playing. There was Cliff Gallup, who was a tremendous rockabilly player, very wild and adventurous. And then he loved Buddy Guy as a blues man, who was probably, again, the guy that was pushing the limits out of everybody. They always said if he hadn't gotten into his, some problems with record companies, he would have been Hendrix before Hendrix. So, Jeff just loved these guys that were really pushing the limits, that were experimental. And in his band, the Tridents, he was doing all sorts of nutty stuff before he got into the Yardbirds. Like, he didn't just have one echo unit, he had two echo units. And he had his friend that was in the band made one of the first primitive fuzz boxes. And you can actually hear some of this early stuff on a box set that Jeff did called Beckology. So right from the get-go, right from when he's 18, 19 in these early bands, he's already pushing the limits. Like, he was never a traditionalist. And there's a story in there where Eric Clapton actually goes to see Jeff play in concert because he wants to see who's going to replace him in the Yardbirds, and is sort of mortified by what he sees, because Clapton at that time was this blues purist. And here's Jeff basically blowing up the stage, with all these crazy sound effects and everything like that. So that was just something inherent. He wasn't interested in looking backwards. He was never a traditionalist. And the people he loved and admired were also always sort of pushing the limits.
So in the Yardbirds, and we're going to move on from the Yardbirds, but
Sure.
I think it's really key to talk about them a bit. It was me too. So their original guitar player was a guy called Top Topham, and then Eric comes in, and he's there for a couple of years. Eric leaves, Jeff Beck comes in, and then after Jeff Beck, you get Page.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool to see the way that each one of those players shape the sound of that band. And, Eric leaves, if I remember my timeline correctly, Eric leaves and goes into the Blues Breakers, which is another band that launched all kinds of crazy careers like Fleetwood Mac and all these other people. So there's this scene that's happening right around this time in London where like all this stuff is just boiling and ready to boil over. And you get all these superstars that were coming up out of this scene. And I think watching the Yardbirds progress is so interesting because you see the voice of these three main guitar players and what they're going to go into after that.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's funny is I was like thinking about this the other day. I was like, what's harder, like spending 3 years writing a 400-page book or trying to sum up Jeff Beck's career half hour. I think it's almost harder, but to put it in some context, I think for your listeners and in what is sort of an expansive career, it's sort of like this. It's Eric Clapton, pretty much, Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page and the Yardbirds, and they're like it's like the Big Bang, but what's interesting is they're three very different people. They're three very different musicians and players in their sensibility. And Eric Clapton, I always saw him as the ambassador of the blues, and then later on a pop guy.
Mm-hmm.
And Jimmy Page brings in that sort of iconic hard rock, heavy metal element.
Mm-hmm.
But Jeff was what he was. I called him a head of R&D. Like he was the guy that was doing the research and the development and doing all the weird stuff and
yes.
And sort of pushing the thing further. Now, of course, we all know Eric Clapton because, he did the blues thing, but also had this commercial sensibility. Mm-hmm. Was a great songwriter as well. Yep. And again, you have Jimmy Page, who is was a genius at putting together and orchestrating bands and creating Led Zeppelin and this, the image thing. But Jeff just always went off on his own way. I think to compare him to a jazz musician is not wrong, not in terms of necessarily what he's playing, but how he approaches the music industry and his work. So a typical jazz guy will always change bands. He'll always find new musicians that reflect where he's at that particular moment. Mm-hmm. And so, because we mentioned Miles and most people are familiar with Miles Davis. Miles Davis had some different bands and was always changing musicians and changing things. Yep. And that's unusual in rock, right?
It is.
Rock, you get your gang together and you stay together.
Yeah, and you have a formula of kind of
die.
Yeah.
But Jeff was always like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm going to move on and do this, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to bring different people along with me. Now, that didn't make a lot of people necessarily love him because, the musicians in his bands were hoping, oh, this is great. Let's do this for another 20 years or whatever.
Right.
But Jeff was always pushing it, doing something different. So, yeah, he was in that grouping with Page and he was in that grouping with Clapton, but he was definitely his own man.
Yeah.
So sort of speaking of jumping around musician to musician, like I personally got into Jeff Beck later. And I mean, obviously I know, I knew the Yardbirds. I know all that, whatever, just like from the radio or whatever. Yeah. But I got kind of obsessed with the Ronnie Scott's shows, in 2007. And that's when, because I kind of got obsessed with Tal Wilkenfeld playing bass. Speaking of, changing up musicians, because I guess what happened was the bass player was there, his bass player who he was playing with, Vinny was touring with The Who. So for the Clapton Crossroads Festival, right, he had to get a new bass player. And Vinny played with that, right? It was, what's his name? Pino?
Yeah, Pino Palladino.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Right. He wasn't available. So Vinny recommended Tal, but that's sort of what drew me in, and just those magical 5, shows that ended up being that amazing album and that the video and stuff, which kind of led to a whole different phase of his career again, right? He got re-signed to ACO at that point. After that, won a Grammy for that album.
Mm-hmm.
So. I like how he changed it up. That was, to me, that was so cool. Like even just when he played with the Beach Boys or when he, all that, like I went to see that tour too, it was really interesting how he had so many phases.
Yeah. And I think that's why we're, still talking about him now is because of how interesting and complex his career was. But on a personal level, since you brought up Tal, this is also something that I don't think that Jeff gets enough credit, or maybe people just don't notice. but he was always ahead of the curve, not only musically, but he was also ahead of the curve culturally. As you'll find out in the book, that he, in the late 60s, he was a animal rights activist, and he was a vegetarian, which was, unusual for the time. In the 70s, he changed to playing more funk and R&B music, and had one of the first interracial rock bands. I mean, he had a black lead singer and a black bassist. It's sort of normal now, but outside of Sly and the Family Stone and maybe a couple of other bands, that just wasn't the case. He championed these black musicians. And then later on, you bringing up Tal, like the whole last 20 years of his career,
he was playing with women,
championing women musicians.
Totally. Yeah.
And what's sort of awesome about it, he didn't make a big deal out of it.
Right.
He just felt that somehow these women were more compatible with what he wanted to express, and they were great musicians, and that's where he felt comfortable. And I talked to Carmen Vandenberg, who's one of the guitar players with him towards the end of his career. And we talked about this quite a bit. She was just saying he didn't love that whole thing, like when he was in rock bands with like the male energy, like guys always trying to outdo each other and this and that and the other thing. And he just found it easier to be creative and work with women. And then I talked to him a little bit about that as well. And he was always really reluctant to say much of anything about it, but he would say that working with cars, because he was also very famous for being a hot rod fanatic. He said that's how he sort of got his masculine energy out, and that felt music was more of a feminine energy, and he felt more in touch with that. So, I just have to say that with Jeff, he wasn't just this guy that worked on hot rods and was a guitar nerd. He was,
I would. That is such a good point, because it's true. All of a sudden you see this, 19 or 20-year-old, young girl playing bass, and you're with this amazing legend and just ripping, and for him to just give that a shot, I think that's great. It's, and I think,
you hear Tal play and then you're just
exactly. It doesn't matter that you,
but
right.
The fact is many of his contemporaries, and I can tell you this for an absolute fact, and I'm not going to name names, but many of his contemporaries would have never made that leap just because it was a woman.
Yeah.
Sure. One of the questions that I like to ask guests, particularly authors who have written a book about a particular genre or particular artist or something, is how would you, like, if there's somebody listening who isn't, like a solid Beck fan and wants to learn more, what are some of the recordings that you would suggest that they go to? But you have done better than that. You put together a playlist that goes along with this book that is, let me just say, 146 songs. It is 11 hours.
I'm sorry.
No.
Alan does this. You and Alan are very much alike.
No one can say you're not a completist.
Yeah. I have been listening to this playlist this week, and
it's great.
Absolutely, because there's, I'm a Jeff Beck fan, but I'm not like a big fan. I don't know, like I know some of his music, but I don't know everything about Beck. And this was very much like prepping for this interview was a big learning experience for me, and I'm really glad for it. I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to this playlist. And, like I know some Yardbirds, and I know some Jeff Beck group, what he did after the Yardbirds and some of his solo things, but there was a lot that I wasn't familiar with. Can you talk about putting together that playlist, and how long was it before you narrowed it down to 146 songs?
Well, it was more of the opposite. Like, we were at like 60, and it would be sort of like, yeah, but you got to have this, you got to have
right.
And I have to say, listen, And I don't care if your listeners are envious. I am going to brag about this. It's a great way to make a living writing a book about Jeff Beck, because I just got to revisit all that stuff. Like normally, I don't know if I would have had the time to, but it was fantastic.
Yeah.
His catalog is so big and so rich, and I found myself discovering, finding all sorts of new insights on it. So the lovely part of what we all get to do here is to really listen to music and think about it, and not have our better halves look at us like we're weirdos or something.
Oh, well, that's still going to happen.
Yeah, that's sad. Too late for that, my friend.
One of the things that I loved the most about this playlist was that you include, it's not just things with Jeff Beck's name on it. It's early influences. It's things like along the path that were also influences, like Mahavishnu Orchestra and Stevie Wonder, and some of his contributions to other artists, like his playing on the Tina Turner album, Private Dancer. And just so it's a really varied listen. And so as far as like an overview of who Jeff Beck is, I think it is very complete. It gives you a great picture of every era of his career.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of, no pun intended, a great bookend, because you can really point the reader to where you want to go, but I think to sort of make that canvas have more texture, giving them examples of it so they don't have to necessarily do the work themselves, really adds to the experience of reading the book.
Yeah, because it is a deep and complicated career.
Yeah.
He does go in many directions. We had to make some decisions, in the book, because he would do sessions, especially in the last half of his career, with a bunch of other people. And we had to say to ourselves, what's really important here? What really tells the story? What's not telling the story? So we can't even really cover everything that he did within the 400 pages,
Oh, sure.
Wow. 10,000 pages at least.
Yeah.
So speaking to that point, is there anything upon Circumspect that you wish you could have gotten into the book that you didn't?
I sort of feel, I'm sorry, I'm pausing on this.
Oh, no, it's fine.
Wow.
Yeah. I often wonder whether I made certain things that I discovered, if I made them clear enough, if I should have written longer about them. Less than, I think I got most of, we got most of the points in there, but I think that, like, for example, I don't know whether you got out of this, one of the big revelations I had about Jeff as a musician was that his guitar playing continued to evolve throughout his career. It never went backwards. It always kept on moving forwards, which is, you can say that about very, very few artists. But my view is I play violin as well as play the guitar. And in his last 10, 15 years, where he was doing these incredible ballads, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and Where Were You, and A Day in a Life, which is tremendous. And what did he do with the Beach Boys? He did God Only Knows, right?
Caroline No, right?
Caroline No, right.
Caroline No, yeah.
Yeah. I think he approached what set him aside from other guitar players was that he approached playing, especially towards the end, as more like a classical musician, not in terms of sound, but every note is important. Every phrase needs to be shaped. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're a guitar player, like you have your bag of licks and you just pull them out, and you just sort of, most guys that I know anyways, just have their things and they play, But for me, every note mattered to Jeff, especially towards the end. Like, he had this way of playing, and let me explain this to you, because I think this is crucial. Ultimately, the guy was a guitar player, and most people, when they look at guitar players, they're always looking at this part, the fretting hand. But where his genius was in the picking hand. Mm-hmm. So he didn't use a pick; he used his fingers, and he manipulated the volume control and then used his whammy bar to create these vibrato tones. And so each note was carefully considered dynamically, and it's how you approach playing a classical piece of music. Like, you have to think about each phrase where you're applying the vibrato. It's not so much shooting from the hip, everything's carefully considered. And I'm sorry if I'm going on too long on this.
Oh, no.
No, please.
This is super interesting.
Yeah.
But Simon Phillips, who we interviewed, the great drummer Simon Phillips, tells a story in the book where Jeff, they're in the middle of a recording session. It's going well, but Jeff just stops and he says, look, I need to work on something. And Simon's like, well, what's that all about? And Jeff goes into another room and they hear him through the wall, and he's playing 3 notes. And for the next half hour, he's just playing these 3 notes, but he's playing them on different strings in different positions on his neck. He's playing them with different, dynamics. And he comes out and he says, okay, I've got it. I'm ready. Let's go. And Simon was like, what's that all about? Like, you were just playing 3 notes over and over again. And Jeff was like, yeah, but I had to find the right 3 notes, and that to me, it, sort of sums up where he was at as a musician, as a player.
And I think even if you don't know that, right, consciously, subconsciously, that comes through, because when we were just talking about the songs that he covered, like, what was it, Day in the Life, Caroline, No.
Right.
I mean,
Surf's Up he did with Brian Wilson, I think.
Like, you can feel, like, it's almost like it brings me to tears to think about those songs, because they're so emotional and every single note, like you said, really matters. And the from the volume to the attack to the pitch to whatever, like he just was, like I said, whether you consciously know that or not, it comes through that he was so caring.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So, anyways, I sort of try to explain that in the book. I don't know whether I was completely successful, but I could have probably gone on a little bit longer about that.
Well, it's interesting too, because one of the things I really liked sort of about diving into him too is that I knew he had a relationship with Fender and guitars, but it sort of speaks to that sort of jazz musician thing, but also that sort of perfectionist, purist type of thing that he, like, of course he had his own custom guitar made, right? And I don't think there's a whole lot of people at this time that are sort of like going, here's the guitar that I want. It'll make the sounds I want. Go make this and come back to me. Before that, it was always taking the instruments that they had and adapting. And I think that people don't really appreciate how pioneering that is. This is sort of like, yeah, I'm not just a sound engineer, but I'm an instrument engineer as well. I think that's really kind of fascinating.
Well, I hope one thing is that I'm a music historian.
Yeah.
And so many of these biographies want to avoid talking about the music and how it's produced. And I take that on as, because I guess the writers either don't know exactly how the music is produced, or they think it's going to go over the head of the audience. And both Chris and I worked really, really hard on this book to say, hey, look, Jeff's an interesting guy. But at the end of the day, you love him because you love the way he plays the guitar. And this has to be included.
Yeah.
And so the trick was always like, how do I explain this to somebody who doesn't play the guitar or isn't necessarily a musician? And that was something we tried to work very carefully on. Almost at one point that we're like, yeah, but so many guitar nerds are going to read this. So we took all the hardcore guitar stuff and put it in the back of the book. So it's there for you guys.
I noticed that.
Yeah, it's very smart. Actually, it's really smart from a editorial point of view and a writing point of view. It's very, very clever.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to talk a little bit about the Johnny Depp collaboration and the friendship, obviously, that because because I'm a huge Johnny Depp fan. But also, I just thought it was a pretty cool, well, obviously they were really great friends, and if I'm right about this, Johnny Depp might have been the only person at the funeral with Jeff's wife. Am I right? I think,
and Jeff's dog
and his daughter. Okay,
no,
but
his dog.
his dog.
Oh, I thought you said his daughter. I'm like, oh, his dog. His dog. That's even better.
Mm-hmm.
But I think maybe some people looked at that like it was sort of an unlikely pairing, but I've always known that Johnny Depp is a guitar player, and that's what he started out as, not as an actor. So, and he's played music throughout his life and in different.
And even as an actor, he's I would say experimental. He's very he never takes on roles that are expected, and
Totally.
I think that's a mindset that he and Beck shared.
Yeah. That's a great point, because you're right. He never took on a role that was like traditional kind of role, maybe once or twice. So anyway,
what was cool was literally a month before I had to turn in the book, I got it was much like the Clive Davis story. I'd been trying to get an interview with Johnny.
Wow.
And Johnny had never really talked at all about Jeff, like hadn't done any sort of extensive interview or anything about him. And part of that was because they were so close. So I was trying to get a hold of Johnny. To be honest with you, I thought my chances were like that, So I was out in California for a music instrument convention, and I was walking through the hotel lobby to go to the convention. And again, my phone rings and I look at it and I'm like, I don't know this number, somebody from LA, maybe it's somebody out here. I'll ask. It's like, hello, Brad. This, like the Johnny Depp voice. I'm not going to try to imitate it because it's horrible. And I ended up talking to Johnny for like about 2 hours.
Oh my gosh.
His time with Jeff and that in his relationship. And it was surprising to me that he called, he's cool. Like John, I think so. I think what it is that we talked a little bit about this. And again, I had to shoot from the hip a little bit. We talked about all sorts of stuff, but when you look at who Johnny's like friends are, like Hunter S. Thompson,
right?
Yeah.
Marlon Brando. I mean, it's these, sort of brilliant off the wall people.
Dennis Hopper. Yeah.
Yeah. Dennis Hopper. Exactly. So, Johnny met Jeff at this award show in London, and they just ended up hitting it off. They both had the same strange sense of humor. And, Johnny at that time was going through the terrible divorce, and he ended up, just staying at Jeff's house with Jeff and his wife for on and off for like 6 months. And they just end up collaborating on music. And, I know a lot of people have mixed feelings about the record, and they sort of want to say, okay, this is just Johnny Depp slumming or something like that. But it's probably the only record that Jeff had nothing bad to say about. Jeff was always hypercritical, but he really enjoyed himself in that collaboration. And when I look back at it now, I was sort of like, what am I going to say about this record? And I realized very unintentionally on Jeff's part, because he didn't know the end was coming, it is sort of a summation of a lot of different portions of his career on one record.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Wow. So you've hit all these great guitarists that you've wanted to do. This is the horrible last question everybody hates, but what would you like to do next, and who would you like to write about next?
Oh, I've got a couple of things already going.
Oh, okay. I figured.
Yeah.
One I could tell you about, and the other one I can't.
Okay.
But one is with a guitarist that may or may not be familiar to you guys. But one of my favorite guitar players of all time, and I'm sort of over the moon about a collaboration, is the jazz guitarist John McLaughlin.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Played with Mahavishnu and Miles Davis and
absolutely
all these incredible, and Jeff Beck, they toured together. And
Yeah.
plague. But I'm working on a really cool project with John. It's a book of his sketches of all the different artists that he's worked with.
Oh, that's cool.
And oh my God, I mean, the people that he worked with were, the list of people that he worked with was astonishing. And, we ended up talking about this thing that nobody really talks about, and it would probably make for a fun book, but I don't know if anybody would pay me to do it, which is just as there was a gigantic blues boom in London in the late 60s, there was also a huge jazz boom that was almost equally as interesting.
Yeah.
And they all gathered at Ronnie Scott's, the place that Jeff played so many years later. Yeah. So anyways, John McLaughlin's one of my guys, and I'm thrilled to be working with him on that project.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It has been such a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, this is great.
Tell listeners about the book and where they can get it.
Yeah.
The book is called Blow by Blow, the Jeff Beck Story. It's substantial. It's 400 pages. It'll tell you everything that you need to know about Mr. Beck. And it's pretty much available at where any of your better books are carried. It's on Da Capo, which is you can go up and type it into the, computer and it'll come up, or better yet, go to your local independent bookstore and see if they'll order it for you.
Yes. 100%. We will include a link to Amazon, and I'll include a link to the Spotify playlist so that people can delve into that stuff. But by all means, if you have a local bookstore that you love, go order from them. All right. Thank you so much. We had such a great time chatting with you.
Okay. Fabulous conversation. Thank you, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, man.
Brad.
It was such a pleasure.
Tell Chris.
And say hello to Chris for us.
Yeah.
Will do.
And when you guys do another book together, come on back.
Yeah.
Definitely will.
All right.
Cool.
If you want to chat about anything else, just let me know. Or come by.
That sounds amazing.
A cup of sugar if you need one. I don't know.
Awesome. All right. You take care, friend.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care, Brad.
Bye.
Thank you.
Riddle me this. What do you get when you cross the 60s Batman show with Drew and Mike's recaps and reviews?
Holy Captain Obvious! That's easy. The Bat Chums Podcast.
Riddle number 2. How do the Bat Chums get across the road?
You don't have to be the world's greatest detective to know that. They are on YouTube and the ESO Network. Just go to batchums.com for more info. And what's with all these ridiculous riddles?
Don't worry. The worst are yet to come.
Oh, that was so good.
Oh, that was so fun.
He was
Man, what a sweet
great.
guy.
Yeah.
And, it's one thing to hear, an author who has written a book about an artist talk about the book and the artist or whatever. But when it's somebody who knew the artist,
Yeah.
you it's a different dimension.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
I thoroughly enjoyed that.
I knew him for so long, so many years.
Yeah. And there was so much that I wanted to ask about that. I mean, that hour just went by
That did
so
go fast.
quickly. I wanted to, we talked a lot about the Yardbirds. I wanted to get into a lot of the Jeff Beck group, because that was some incredible music that came out of that. Anyway. All right. So we're going to be back in 2 weeks, and we are going to be talking about a list that came out from Consequence magazine of the 100 greatest tours ever. So we're going to be talking about that list and our reaction to it. And we're going to talk about some of the great tours that we've seen. And Stephanie probably is going to have something to say about a show that she saw last night. And I can't wait to get into that. So everybody join us again in 2 weeks. So we'll sign off now and say thanks for joining us. Oh, yeah. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at modernmusicology1@gmail.com, or just drop a comment on our socials. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Everybody take care and keep rocking on.
Peace out.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. ESONetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.